You're listening to the January 21st, 2016 edition of the Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup, the weekly podcast that's focused on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. The Cyber Risk Roundup is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. I am Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, and I'm here with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. On today's episode, we're going to be bringing you the top trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions related to cybercrime, as we do every single week. And we'll just jump right into it and throw it over to you, Matt, for the top 5 cybercrime events from the past week.
Coming in at number 1 this week, we're going to talk about Asda, which is a supermarket. And there was a bug in their website. Millions of online transactions could have been leaked due to a flaw in the U.S.-owned retail firm Asda website. Asda processes hundreds of thousands of online orders each week. The firm's website is run by Walmart, which is probably one of the main reasons this story is trending. According to security expert Paul Moore, the retail company was first informed of the flaw in 2014. Asda is now acknowledging the flaw and said no customer has been affected. One of the big things about this story, Jeff, was Paul Moore actually informed Asda about this flaw back in 2014. They didn't do anything about it, and the only reason Asda is even reacting to this is because Paul Moore wrote a blog about it recently saying, hey, I informed them back in 2014 something was going on. Nothing's changed. It's 2016. They haven't done anything. So that kind of brought about some action for the company.
Yeah, and it seems to be the case in so many of these stories that we read on the podcast here is, there's a vulnerability, there's something wrong, a researcher reports on it, discloses it responsibly to the company, and then they sit there and wait to see if it gets resolved. And then finally they just give up and say, all right, I'm going to tell the world about it because you're not doing anything. That sounds like what happened in this case anyways. But for those who are curious what the actual exploit was, according to Paul Moore, he says it involves 2 well-known exploits, cross-site scripting and a cross-site request forgery. And if you combine them, the hackers can access all the information that users put on the site. So basically he said if someone has both the Asda website open and another site that is infected with malware, those users could then be vulnerable to the attack. And that was the problem. But I believe that the problem is now fixed, according to someone from Asda.
Yeah, moving on. Coming in number 2, and I didn't think we were going to be talking about this group again so soon.
They're always there.
Always there. Crackas with attitude. They hacked another U.S. government official. This time, the group targeted President Barack Obama's senior advisor of science and technology, John Holdren. If you guys remember last week, we talked about the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, being hacked by this group. And in that instance, it was a hacker that went by the name Crackas. In this case, for the John Holdren hack, it was a hacker from the group going by the name Fears, and he essentially did the same thing he did to Clapper. He got into his Verizon account and forwarded all the phone calls from his home address to be forwarded to this Free Palestine movement. This group first became famous when they hacked CIA Director John Brennan's AOL account, which was sometime in 2015.
Yeah, and the interesting thing I saw, the Motherboard article I was reading about it, they said that there's actually other government officials that the group claims to have also hacked in the past. Amy Hess, the FBI's Executive Assistant Director for Science and Technology. White House Communications Director Jen Psaki, White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough, and the Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken, as well as the White House Deputy National Security Advisor Avril Haines. So there's quite a few people that they're claiming to have hacked, in these government positions.
I really haven't ever. I've seen a couple things about, maybe some of the motivations. It seems like they support Palestine. But have you seen, in all the information you've seen on this, have you really seen any motivation? I mean, are they doing this for what hackers like to say, doing it for the lulz? Or
yeah, that's how I have viewed this group. Not that I've really researched them extensively, other than the little bit we talked about on the podcast. But they seem to me that they're just doing it because they can, and I think they're kind of getting a chuckle out of it too.
Well, they're on pace to be in our podcast for 52 straight weeks, so we'll see how it goes.
Maybe they just have good PR, because maybe they hacked all the people at once, and now once a week they're gonna release it and get the headlines, of all these new people. So we'll see if next week they got someone else that we're talking about.
Moving on, coming in at number 3, we have China's Tsinghua University website was hacked by ISIS. The university website was targeted by an ISIS-affiliated hacker that called himself the Islamic State hacker. The hacker essentially hacked the website and defaced it. The website displayed messages from the hacker, a picture of ISIS warriors on horses, and it also played an audio clip that seemed to be some type of support song for the Islamic State's holy war. This attack was not the first that the university website has ever faced. However, it was the first time that it was attacked by ISIS hackers.
The final top trending targets this week had to do with a couple of health service providers. Blue Shield of California, they experienced a breach. According to company sources, the company experienced a data breach between September and December of 2015. The data breach was the result of login credentials being misused, and as a result, about 21,000 patients were affected. Patients' names, addresses, birth dates, and social security numbers were exposed. And then New West Health Services suffered a breach. They're in Montana, and what happened there was a laptop containing patient data was stolen, and due to that theft, about 25,000 patients could have had their personal information exposed, and that includes the usual, like patients' names, addresses. This one actually includes driver's license numbers, social security numbers, Medicare numbers, and payment card information. So if it's more than just a stolen laptop, when they actually use that information, there's some pretty valuable stuff in that breach.
To kick off the top 5 advisors for the week, we're going to start with a Surfwatch Labs threat spotlight, and it has to do with tax season threats. Obviously, it's January, so tax season is here. Users go through a lot of personal data during this season, as well as a variety of programs, software services, and forms. And then obviously, as been highlighted quite a bit, that the tech scams out there are just, there's a lot of them going on at all times.
Yeah, and I believe one of the top trending stories of all last year was, the whole thing with the IRS and their Get Transcript service and all the fraudulent returns there. I actually just saw a news item this morning. I don't know if you guys remember, I believe it was back in 2014, there was this group of employees at the University of Northern Iowa. About 100 of them, I believe, they went to basically file their 2014 taxes, and they all came back rejected because they'd already been filed. And they actually just arrested this guy. I'm looking at an Iowa newspaper now, and it says that a Georgia resident that was linked to this tax refund scheme has been arrested. So, just kind of a reminder that this is a pretty popular time of year, and there's a lot of criminals going after doing this kind of thing.
Jeff and I are going to go through some recommended actions that you can take to kind of keep yourself safe this tax season. The IRS will not contact you via phone or email. Due to budget cuts at the IRS, it is highly likely this will not change in 2016. And to be honest with you, even if there wasn't budget cuts, the IRS just doesn't call you or email you. They love to send mail to you. And Jeff, you ever had to talk to the IRS over the phone for anything?
No, thank goodness I've never had that experience in my life.
One time, and it's not fun. The IRS just doesn't have the manpower to reach out to users if they can't even man their phone lines properly. It takes hours to get through and talk to someone. So if you do receive a phone call or an email from someone claiming to be with the IRS, hang it up and delete it. Do not pay attention to it. It is not actually from the IRS. And
that's good advice, I think, just in general for everything. I mean, I've gotten plenty of phone calls. They call you with credit offers and all these different things. And, 9 out of 10 times they're scams. Usually if it's something important, you should be calling the company rather than them calling you. And then another tip is to file early. Obviously, if, in a way, it can be like a race to see who's going to get that return to the IRS first, whether it's the scammer or whether it's you. So especially if you got simple returns and you have all your information, you might as well file now rather than wait and then someone else beats you to it and then you got to deal with that whole thing. And the IRS does have a basically kind of like a 2-factor authentication system where you can get a PIN if you've been a victim of ID theft in the past. So if you've had this happen in the past, you probably already got this set up. But last I looked into it, It would be cool if they could roll out that pin for everybody and set it up, and then it would stop a lot of this. But from my understanding, just with the budgets and the technology behind it, they didn't have the money to kind of roll it out to everyone. That was last year when I looked into it, and I assume it's probably the same case this year.
Yeah, and one of the last points is you want to not only check, you want to double check and monitor all of your activities. And when it comes to website URLs, you want to make sure that you're actually communicating with the right website. It's really easy, and a lot of cyber criminals, through what we call cyber squatting, they will actually sit down and try to expose like a missing letter here or whatever. So it's really important to make sure you're double checking that if you're visiting a website or something like that, that you're actually on the correct website. And there's a lot of things you can look for, like I said, missing letters, like a weird phrase or something like that. One of the popular ones that I see is it'll be .co instead of .com. So there's things that you can definitely look at.
Yeah, so obviously, tech stuff, that's going to be a big theme the next couple of months. One of the other big advisories this month had to do with advertisers. There was a study released by the Association of National Advertisers and White Ops that stated advertisers are predicted to lose $7 billion in 2016 due to bot fraud. So that's a pretty good chunk of change.
Yeah, that's a big chunk of change.
So the study tracked 10 billion online advertising impressions across 1,300 campaigns over a 61-day period from August to September of last year. And that's basically how they found out and came up with this $7 billion number. There's a couple different ways some of these bots do stuff, whether it's just driving up the number of impressions or driving up the number of clicks, things like that. There's different bots just to kind of apparently lead to $7 billion in loss. So that's pretty significant. And the study concluded that there really wasn't much of a change during the same period in 2014. So, it seems like it's kind of holding steady from where it was the year previous.
Yeah, holding steady at horrible, but it's holding steady.
Just 7 billion.
Yes, no big deal. No big deal. Coming in number 3, we have a malvertising advisory. The MSN homepage was exploited again, and it's serving up malware to their visitors. This malvertising campaign, the criminals are exploiting an ad technology platform called AdSpirit to pull off the attack. It appears that this campaign is primarily targeting German users because it's using an ad for, I believe it's called Lidl, Lidl, and this is a leading supermarket in Germany. Obviously, you could kind of probably tell my tone of voice. This is not the first time that MSN has been used for malvertising, so probably won't be the last either.
The number 4 trending advisory this week had to do with LastPass, which is a password manager. And we've talked about this in the past, just different ways these password managers are being exploited. And so the security researcher Sean Cassidy, he recently presented this LastPass attack. And basically, it's basically like a phishing method where he could trick LastPass users into giving up their email addresses and master passwords, as well as like two-factor authentication codes if you have that set up for LastPass. What this researcher did is he could simulate the pop-up that LastPass gives you to log in with your master password. So you go to a website, you get a pop-up, you assume that it's LastPass doing the pop-up, but it's actually, a phishing trick. And then you end up giving them your master password, and then once they have your master password, obviously if you have all your stuff saved in a vault, they can go ahead and get all that information. And they could also simulate, the two-factor prompt and everything as well to kind of steal that information. So, it's not necessarily like an exploit or anything in the password manager. It's just, I think, good to be aware of the various phishing methods. And obviously, people are going to be targeting things like password managers because, if they can get through that, they can get to a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, and as we've said in the past, I personally still think password managers are the safer bet, even though that there's vulnerabilities with anything. But I think that a password manager is probably still a safer bet than not using one, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, we were talking right before we started recording about how I used the same password for like every single account. Same ones from junior high all the way till when I was 25. So
right,
that wasn't very smart either. I definitely think you should use a manager.
The number 5 advisory for the week had to do with earbits.com, which is something I've never heard of before. Apparently, 13 million user account records were exposed. This was all according to security researcher Chris Vickery. More than 13 billion earbits.com accounts records were left exposed on a database server. Of these 13 million records, 325 of them were actually leaked. User information exposed included names, email addresses, password, IPs, and access keys to Earbit's Amazon S3 accounts. And here's a quote from Vickery on this vulnerability. At this point, it is unknown how long the database remained exposed to the world and whether Earbits will be notifying its users of the breach. It would be a good idea for all Earbits users to change their password for the site and their password on any other site that may have used the same password. Pretty solid advice.
Pretty much what we were just talking about. Why you should use a password manager.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you have the same password. Earbits gets taken over, and now they're logging into your Chase Bank account and doing that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now moving on to the trending legal news from the week, and if you want to know what I spent most of my morning doing today, it was reading this Supreme Court ruling that came out on Wednesday. Exciting stuff. And that is the week's top trending legal news item. Basically, what happened was on Wednesday, the Supreme Court ruled on class action lawsuits. The case was Campbell-Ewald Company versus Gomez. And just a little background, not to get too into the weeds here, but what happened was, going all the way back to the year 2000, the Navy wanted to do some marketing and promotion. So they ended up working with this marketing agency, Campbell-Ewald. And then come 2006, they wanted to basically send text messages, to do some marketing stuff. So Campbell-Ewald contracted with this company called Mindmatics to send messages for the U.S. Navy. So there was about 100,000 people that they sent messages to in 2006. And those people were supposed to be people who had opted in to receive messages and be between the ages of 18 and 24. Because you can't just spam people text messages. It's against the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. So anyways, these messages go out, and one of these recipients, Jose Gomez, he alleged that he never consented to receiving this message, and he was 40, so he's outside of, what the Navy was looking for anyways. So this led to a class action lawsuit against Campbell-Ewald Company for basically violating the TCPA. Now, fast forward to what's going on with the Supreme Court thing. Campbell actually agreed to pay them. It's basically a $500 fine per message from the TCPA, and Campbell actually agreed to pay him $1,503 per message for any of the text messages that he received that it wasn't supposed to. However, Gomez did not accept that settlement. So that led to this whole thing of basically if a company offers you a settlement and you refuse, is there ground still for a lawsuit? Does the lawsuit continue? And that's what the Supreme Court was ruling on. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she wrote in the opinion that, in short, with no settlement offer still operative, the parties remained adverse. So both retained the same stake in the litigation they had at the outset. So, this class action lawsuit against Campbell can continue. So it's kind of, a little into the weeds there if you don't follow this legal news all that much. But the summary of it is that some people are saying it's a good ruling for consumers and a bad ruling for businesses in terms of the amount of class actions that we might see, because this was kind of a way that a company could head off a class action, some people were saying, or some of the legal experts that are much smarter than me, I was reading today. But now, of course, the Supreme Court saying that you can't do that, like this company was attempting to argue in court.
Yeah, so essentially, if I was involved in a class action lawsuit, we wouldn't need every single person on that class action lawsuit to agree to a settlement to kind of make it binding then. Like not everyone has to be all in with it for the lawsuit to continue, right?
Campbell, basically they were saying that the argument that they put forth in court was that there's basically you have to have a case or controversy in order to bring legal action. You can't just bring legal action because you feel like it. So that's what, the whole idea of standing and why cases get thrown out. So their argument was after Gomez turned down the settlement, which was, they argued, pretty much everything he asked for. So basically they say, that there is no case or controversy that remains, Campbell argued, because its offer mooted Gomez's individual claim because they're saying, hey, we're going to give him the relief that he needed. And this all happened before there was class certification anyway, so they argued that should moot the class certification. At least that's my understanding from what I read, but, take it with a grain of salt. I'm no lawyer. If you want the Supreme Court, you can go to their website. They got the whole opinion right there, the dissenting opinions and everything. Chief Justice Roberts wrote a dissenting opinion, basically disagreeing with it. It was a 6-3 vote, so if you want to kind of get his analysis, there's actually some pretty good stuff in there if you want to check it out.
So we can handle cybersecurity jargon, but we can't do law jargon and really understand it. That's complicated stuff.
Yeah, and I've been kind of getting really into the legal stuff for pretty much the past couple months, and I have a pretty good grasp on it. But you're always a little wary that you're going to come across sounding like an idiot when you're trying to explain these Supreme Court decisions and everything. But actually, John Roberts, what he was basically pointing out, if you want to get really technical about it, the majority ruled that an offer of complete relief is insufficient to moot a case. And moot must be some legal term because I keep seeing moot in these documents.
Yeah.
But the majority does not say that payment of complete relief leads to the same result. So this is kind of funny, I think. Chief Justice Roberts, he basically tells a business in his dissenting opinion, he says that the majority's analysis may have come out differently if Campbell had deposited the offered funds with the district court. So if they would have said, hey, we're going to give you this money, we're going to deposit, however you go about the legal means of doing that into the court and kind of make the payment, then he says that could have led to a different outcome, and the majority kind of agreed that if there was actual payment, then this would be a whole other case that has to go to the Supreme Court. So hopefully we didn't lose you there with all that technical stuff. I don't know, did that make sense, Matt, or are you totally confused?
No, I am with you. Yeah, you're right. That was a lot to cover, but that completely makes sense, and that's newsworthy. That's important.
So it sounds like if this happens in the future, and if there's someone that says, hey, these are my claims, a company could potentially deposit those funds with the district court, do whatever they have to do, kind of for that, and then it wouldn't that they offered the relief. It would be that they actually completed payment of the relief, which could potentially lead to a whole nother Supreme Court ruling on what that means. So I just thought it was kind of funny that he kind of says, hey, if you're a company, you can do this, and it's going to go against what we just ruled. So yeah, that was probably the big story of the week, just because, obviously anytime the Supreme Court rules on anything like class actions, that could potentially have impacts on all the breaches and stuff we talk about every week. But there was actually a lot of other really weird and interesting news on the legal front this week.
Yeah, the number 2 trending settlement lawsuit or legal news for the week had to do with AF Global Corporation. They're suing their cyber insurance provider after their insurer refused to cover $480,000 in losses tied to a scam known as business email compromise, or as Jeff and I have discovered, it's also known as whaling. And
CEO fraud, I guess, too.
And CEO fraud.
I saw Krebs wrote about it the other day, and he called it CEO fraud.
So a lot of different names. So here's what's going on. A malicious actor impersonating the company's CEO sent a series of emails to the firm's director of accounting in May 2014. Those emails, along with a phone call, led to the director issuing a fraudulent $480,000 wire fraud transfer. And that's exactly what business email compromise is, or one of the most popular ways it's conducted. AF Global held a cyber insurance policy with Federal Insurance Company, or Chubb Group, that covered losses up to $3 million. And this is what Brian Krebs reported on this. He says, in a letter sent by Chubb to the plaintiff, the insurance firm said it was denying the claim because the scam did not involve the forgery of a financial instrument as required by the policy. It could be a little shady. I don't know about that. We'll have to see how that plays out. But business email compromise is we're hearing about that more and more as time goes on. It's a very low cost attack that can have huge payouts. So that is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and then the number 3 trending legal item this week. Number 2, we had a company suing its insurer. In this case, we have a company suing the security company. So casino operator Affinity Gaming, they are suing the security firm that conducted its investigation following a 2013 data breach of payment card information. So they hired TrustWave after they had this data breach. TrustWave's subsequent investigation was, according to the complaint, quote, woefully inadequate. And what they argued was that TrustWave did not remove the malware, did not look through all their systems, basically did not live up to their expectations as a security company. And as a result, Affinity Gaming experienced a second data breach more than a year later, I believe from the same malware is their argument, because TrustWave didn't actually do its job, they're arguing. So according to the complaint, TrustWave lied when it claimed that its so-called investigation would diagnose and help remedy the breach, when it represented that the data breach was contained, and when it claimed that the recommendations it was offering would address the data breach. TrustWave's misrepresentations and grossly negligent performance resulted in Affinity Gaming suffering significant out-of-pocket losses. And so after the second data breach, they hired a second company, and that second company basically told them, hey, the first company, TrustWave, didn't do a very good job. So interesting, we got the Supreme Court ruling this week. We got people suing insurance companies. We got people suing cybersecurity companies. All sorts of craziness going on.
Yeah, and so moving on to number 4, I don't know if anyone even remembers this because it seems like it's ancient history now, but there was quite a big data breach that occurred at Michael's, the craft store.
Yeah, that was right. That was after the shortly, like a couple months after the Target breach, if I remember. So it kind of got lost in some of the Target noise.
Yeah, we all talk about Target, but we don't talk about this. But a district judge, dismissed a class action lawsuit that was stemming from that breach. The federal judge dismissed the class action lawsuit against Michael's. And in this data breach, just as a reminder, 2.6 million payment cards were leaked as a result of the breach. And not only was Michael's affected, and just a little side note, also their subsidiary, Aaron Brothers, was included as well. U.S. District Court Judge Joanna Siebert cited the Supreme Court's Clapper versus Amnesty International decision, saying that the plaintiffs, quote, failed to allege an injury that is certainly impending or based on a substantial risk that the harm will occur, while other courts have ruled contrary to Clapper. Most notably, the Seventh Court in Remedios versus Neiman Marcus Group. That line of reasoning did not apply to the Michaels case, wrote Siebert. And this is what she had to say. One critical distinction in that case is that 9,200 of those customers experienced fraudulent charges following the breach. By contrast, the plaintiff's complaint only indicates that she was affected, and even she did not suffer any out-of-pocket losses. And I think, Jeff, when we're looking at that, I think that actually makes a lot of sense. Just the way I look at it. I mean, number one, so I'm sure there was already a lot of payment that had to be incurred by everyone involved. So you're talking Michael's, probably banks reissuing cards, I'm sure had to happen. Had to have happened. If the plaintiffs didn't actually lose any money or anything like that, or just depending on how they were affected, I don't know if there really is a case for the lawsuit. That's my opinion on it.
Yeah, and back when this Remedios versus Neiman Marcus ruling came out last year, that was kind of the argument, was we're going to see a lot more of these class actions because, now certainly impending and substantial risk of future harm was being met. But, she's the judge in this case is arguing, well, okay, in Neiman Marcus, there was 9,200 distinct cases of customers experiencing charges, whereas in this case, the complaint only lists one, and she was reimbursed for that loss. So that's kind of the difference, I guess, in those two cases. Yeah, and then to wrap up the week's legal news, we had some guidance that was issued from for a couple different aspects. The FDA issued some guidance on medical device cybersecurity. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has issued a draft guidance, and they're seeking public comments over the next 90 days. This guidance is about monitoring, identifying, and addressing cybersecurity vulnerabilities in medical devices once they have entered the market. So they got some things in there, and people can comment on that and over the next 90 days. And then another piece is Lloyd's of London. They have collaborated on core requirements for cyber insurance. The insurer said that they collaborated with some modeling firms to come up with a list of these core data requirements. Tim Bolt, who's Lloyd's Director of Performance Management, he said that's important because cyber insurance is an important new area of coverage. And like we talk about on the podcast, it's essential that we have good quality standards to track those exposures. And, they're still trying to kind of lock down the pricing and, the different models and things like that. So Lloyd's has kind of collaborated to do some stuff on that. And the FDA is also putting out some more guidance on medical devices. So a lot of stuff going on this week. And that wraps up the news portion, the top 5 events, advisories, and legal actions that you might have missed over the past week. Before we wrap up the podcast, we'll check in with Matt to see if he found any funny stories this week.
Sure did. So, besides the fact that a lot of us are probably still writing 2015 on checks and things like that, 2015 has come and gone. with the start of 2016, there's going to be several articles about the year 2015. I think that's only natural. I did stumble across one of these articles about 2015 that I found funny. So without further ado, here is the list of the top 25 worst passwords used in 2015. I love these articles, Jeff. I think they're great. Right off the bat, Jeff, do you think that you could guess what the number one most used and worst password was in 2015?
I'm pretty sure last year, and if it wasn't necessarily the top last year, I know when there was a big Adobe breach, I think in 2013, and they analyzed like those millions of passwords, and I'm pretty sure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 was the top. So that's what, if I had to put some money on it, I would go with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as being the most popular password.
Ding, 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 ding. What do we have for him, Johnny?
All right.
Oh, man, that's great. I don't actually have a prize for you. Sorry, but yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from what I'm understanding, in consecutive years, was the most used and worst password of 2015. Now, this is a list of 25, and I'm not going to actually read all 25, but they kind of break down in 3 categories. Number 1 is numerical. So we're talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, there's probably 10 other mentions on, maybe 7, 8, where it's, okay, so it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One is even 1, 2, 3, 4, so they really took some time on that one. The next is what I'm going to call key placement password. An example of this is the password QWERTY. Well, if you look at your keyboard, we call them a QWERTY keyboard. You look QWERTY right there. Another one, and this, and as Jeff and I were talking about this before the podcast, we're looking at it as like, this might be something where the people think they're being clever, but it's actually kind of easy. If you look, all right, the password is 1QAZ2WSX. Well, if you look at your keyboard, starting with the 1 and going down, and then the 2 and going down, those are just like the first 2 columns on your keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of easy. And then the third category is what I call just like, like random words, but they're easy words like football, baseball. One was actually let me in, no spaces, so okay. Another one was welcome, as in welcome to my account. ABC123, which I will say, after the Jackson 5 song. But here are my favorite 2. Coming in at number 16 was the word dragon. Then coming in at number 25, which actually happened to be my favorite one, was the word Star Wars. So those are, just in a nutshell, 25 most used and probably worst passwords of 2015.
All right, that'll do it for this week's podcast. As always, the Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact of their business, and proactively address threats head-on. For more information on cyber risk intelligence, check out surfwatchlabs.com.